Dawn
Well, look,
Hearn.
Jane, where in the heck have you been?
I'm here, aren't I? I got to do an hour and a half one with Kindred starting at 8.
Hilton, you
She's
just
a
sent
busy
me?
lady.
Oh, that was,
Well,
remember,
thank-
we had
thank you,
that
Jane.
automatic.
What
My
happened?
brother's watching.
Oh, there you go.
I didn't know what they did.
He's the only Yale pitcher to beat Harvard twice in one
Changed
season.
it during the pandemic or what? You know?
All right. So Katie, Jane,
Yes.
Tom, Bill, Joe, Katie's going to let us know when we go live. I will do some intro remarks and then we will take off and get going. The audience has just finished watching your program by about 10 minutes ago. So they're, they're primed and ready to go. So we'll see. We'll
All
see.
right, Michael, you are ready to go.
Okay. All right. Good evening, sports fans, and welcome to our second night of live Q&A for our celebration of the Babe Ruth Birthday Bash. Thank you all for tuning in this evening. We have 4 of our 5 panelists from the interview that you just heard about Babe Ruth. So we're really excited to have Joe Castiglione, who was the moderator for our show on the voice of the Boston Red Sox, Tom Schieber, who is the senior curator from the National Baseball Hall of Fame, Jane Levy, the renowned baseball biographer who just finished a book in 2018 called The Big Fella, which really just lays it out about Babe Ruth, stuff you never knew before. And Bill Jenkinson, who has devoted the majority, I would say, Billy, of your professional life to exploring the power and the panache of Babe Ruth in terms of his impact on baseball, but also on the American culture. So to me, this is one of the great panels that we could ever put together. And I will start off by saying that I was thinking about this tonight. I have spent pretty much the most part of the last 40 years hanging out with Babe Ruth and living over top of the room where he was born. And along with fellow staffers, Sean Hearn, Katie Dick, who is producer this evening, and Edmure Holtz and others, we have been working at this for a long time. And it is stunning to me that we continue to find new things about Babe Ruth. New stuff is always coming up. He is always in the news. And I know that in the interview that just preceded this, that you guys did, you talked about, Tom, I think you did, the fact that Jack Dempsey was kind of like right there with Babe Ruth back in the 20s, the early 20s, and that over time, Jack kind of faded away. But in terms of him being an American cultural icon, but Ruth continued to ascend. I like to tell the story, and I've probably bored you with this, but I taught a college writing course for about 25 years. And I started in my first semester introducing myself and what I did for a real living. And I would say, how many of you have ever heard the name Babe Ruth? And everybody would raise their hand. 25 years later, everybody had raised their hand until the last semester. And one kid did not raise his hand. And I said, you don't know Babe Ruth? And he goes, no. And I said, where are you from? And he goes, Nigeria. And I said, okay, you get a pass on that. But everybody still kind of knows the name, and it is a remarkable phenomenon. So I open up to the panel. What is it about Babe Ruth that allows him to remain an American cultural icon? Take over, somebody.
Okay, why not me? Can you hear
Alrighty.
me right? Hi, guys. He was an original, an American original. And he wasn't just the first, he was the guy who created the template for how to be famous in this culture at a moment exactly in time when being famous was being augmented by new technology. And if you look at the size of his hands, which everybody, told me I should do, and you can kind of verify it by the size of his bowling ball and where the holes are in it. He took the whole damn world, all of New York City, into those hands and with that big bat and refashioned the game he played. I mean, it's recognizable today, the game Babe Ruth played. Yeah. They got all the stats and the this and the that, and they're hitting, launch angles and stuff. But, basically the power game that he created still pertains. You could, somebody from 1920 could come on and look at a game today and say, oh, yeah, Babe Ruth did that. And there are not that many people in sports that can turn the way something is played on its butt and redo it. I mean, Bill Russell made, being a defensive player, the centerpiece. He didn't have to be an also-ran. Jimmy Connors turned a return of serve into a weapon. There are not very many players who can do that kind of thing. And he had the imagination to do it. And the chutzpah, this was not a guy who wanted to abide by anybody else's rules, rarely did in any conceivable way. So why should I play the game the way they've always played it? Why should I listen to some pipsqueak in a dugout telling me to, hit the other way so I can send the man from first to second? Ridiculous. I can take my bat in my hands and hit the ball over the fence, in one fell swoop, and that's it. He was an original American. He was almost Shakespearean. That's why I said one fell swoop.
That's right. Tom Schieber, you live up there in Cooperstown. Is there a more impactful player even today than Babe Ruth? And talk about that a little bit.
No. How's that for short and sweet? It is remarkable how well his name is known today, and I totally agree with everything Jane just said. And I guess I want to be a little bit more brusque about it, and that is, as Jane mentioned, he did turn the game on its butt, but he just was a quantum leap better than the rest. And I know we like to talk about, oh, he could have been a great pitcher, and that's what makes him so great. I really am not a big fan of that argument. He was a great pitcher, but that's not what the quantum leap was about. The quantum leap was about the batting, and he completely transformed the game by having a ton of power and not sacrificing hitting. There was always this idea that you sacrificed your batting average if you went for more power. And he completely proved that incorrect, in a way that's, like I said, a quantum leap better. So I just don't want to discount the fact that how much better a ball player he was. And then other people caught up. I mean, not completely caught up, but I mean, and other guys figured out what he was doing. But we just can't discount that. The fact that he set the single season home run record 3 seasons in a row, and he just demolished what he had done each time. You have to put those numbers in perspective at the time. You have to do your best to move back into the 1920s, and that way you can see how it's much more eye-popping. It's just blowing away. And there are other great athletes that have done great things. I'm just having trouble, and I'm not a historian of all sports, but I'm having trouble really coming up with a comparison. I kind of want to say Wayne Gretzky transformed the game, but I sort of think you can't even pull this off now because there's so much other stuff going on. So Gretzky, I think, is transformative, but and people know his name, but I just don't think it's going to happen with him. What happened with Babe? So I don't want to discount the greatness on the field.
Okay. Hey, Billy Jenkinson, talk a little bit about what we're talking about here. Ruth as the American cultural icon, he's right up there on the Mount Rushmore American icons, in my opinion anyway, with JFK and Martin Luther King and Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley. And, where does he fit within all of that?
Well, certainly in the sports world, Mike, he's at the head of the class. And I believe we have to look at two fundamental truths. Number one, his physical superiority, and he's the only athlete in American history, probably in world history, who can be proven to be physically superior to athletes that came 100 years after him. So it starts with that. But it's also true that he possessed a combination of behavioral and psychological traits that has never been duplicated. We've never seen anyone like him. We might keep waiting for another 100 years, and I doubt we'll see anyone else like that. What am I talking about? Well, we see a guy who was immensely likable, even lovable. And there have been other athletes like that, but I don't think anyone ever had the man's combination of vulnerability and coinciding at the same exact time with the ability to infuse hope in his fellow man. And I don't think we can ever overstate the importance of that. Everyone related to this guy. He got along just as well with the super rich and famous and powerful as he did with the common man who had a hard time getting up in the morning and paying his bills. We haven't seen anyone like that. And I think it's because of the fact that he was just so physically transcendent and he wore his heart on his sleeve. And the guy had a tendency to get knocked down, Mike. You know that. We all know that. And he always got back up. And when he did, he never compromised anything. He never took a backward step. He got up and he swung for the fences. And we just haven't seen anyone like that in combination. I doubt we ever will again.
Hey, Joe Castiglione, you're up in Boston. Boston, lost Ruth, the curse of the Bambino and all that. How, and we've been talking about how he is revered as an American cultural icon. How is he on the landscape, the sports landscape in Boston and up in your area? Is he the Bambino, or is he something a little less?
He is the Bambino, but I think there's always a sense of regret that he went to the Yankees and made that franchise really what it was. And Boston lost him because of Harry Frazee and whether it was the need to finance Broadway shows or he just tired of his lack of discipline, Babe's lack of discipline, and the need to, and his desire for a much larger contract. It was a huge loss. And I think that's the way Boston feels. He did win, of course, World Series. He was on the 1915 team, which he wasn't a great part of that World Series, but 16 and 18. And for years, we had to hear that 1918 chant till the Red Sox ended the 86-year drought in 2004. So I think there was more of a sense of loss in Boston about Babe. He, to me, is the first athlete that ever transcended sports. I mean, he was much more than an athlete. He was a true American icon and celebrity at the time he played and still is today. And he was so photogenic. I mean, the cameras loved him. He loved to act for the cameras. He had the relationship with the youngsters that was so important to his overall image. The crudeness, which is part of it too. But again, I think the biggest thing is he transcended sports, and maybe the only other athlete in that class is Muhammad Ali.
That would be right. That would be right. I think that for all of us today, none of us were around to see Babe Ruth play and to experience what that phenomenon was. The closest we could get to it would be the Beatles, as you guys brought up in the program just before we went live with the Q&A. And will there ever be another Beatles phenomenon? Probably not. I mean, it's happened. Babe Ruth has happened. So that's the way that goes. Hey, I think it's time to open up to our audience for questions, and we appreciate your patience. But if anyone does have a question, let's go through Katie and get to our panel and see what people have to say. Up to you, Katie.
We have a limited time with Jane this evening. She's got another commitment. So questions directed to Jane first would be wonderful. Just unmute yourself, Fran. If you have a question, go ahead.
Let me begin by thanking the panel. I thought you all did a fantastic job this evening. So thank you very much. And Jane, I'll direct this at you, but ask everyone to comment as well. I think I learned my first orientation to Babe Ruth was through TV and movies. It wasn't in books. And I'm curious as to whether you all feel that movies have done more good or more harm to Babe Ruth's sort of the legend, and to your earlier points about how while Jack Dempsey may have gotten a lot more coverage in the early days, Babe has sustainability, but there's been trade-off with that sustainability and sort of separating fact from fiction. So it's kind of a long-winded question, but I think you know what I'm trying to get at.
Sure. The movies were egregious. I mean, the famous one in 40 is just, it's awful. I mean, and it rife with mistakes, and they made the kind of changes that Hollywood often does to a life story because they think it's economical or whatever. So Johnny Sylvester happens to be in a hospital in Chicago when Babe Ruth promises to hit the called shot for him, which is not true. Needless to say, the boy was in New Jersey and he wasn't in a hospital. He was in his bed and upstairs, and Mr. Ruth arrived at the door and introduced himself to the stunned housemaid. And he went upstairs and brought him a ball and said it was great that he really wasn't dying. But the movies, in their terribleness, have also added to the legend, because once more, and for me, as a biographer, it's like one more layer of BS that you had to scrape away. A couple of there have been a couple of things. There was a theater production that flopped. There's a Stephen Lang movie, which was meh, and John Goodman. I'm still hoping, and there's some chance that my book's going to be purchased for some kind of production. So that would make me feel very happy, and I hope it would be more accurate.
Me too.
Jane, I'll tell you this. I think the 1940, what was it, 48, story. Yeah, that's a terrible movie, but it's like fantastic compared to the Babe, the John Goodman one. I still have not made it through that movie. And it's not just like the inaccuracies. I think I can move beyond the inaccuracies in all of this. It's just whether or not I'm enjoying the movie. I can focus on that, and I can't even do that with John, who, by the way, John Goodman, fellow St. Louis, and I'm from St. Louis, so I'm not anti-John Goodman, but that movie has a special place.
And Babe Ruth hell.
Hell, special circle in hell. It's just I can't get through it.
Was William Bendix the 1948 movie?
I'm sorry.
William Bendix was 1948.
Fabulous casting decision.
Yeah.
And there's Babe out in California on his last trip west when they're making this thing, and he's supposed to be a consultant, and he's dying. He can barely swing a bat, and then they set him up in a park to try to show Bendix how to hit a ball. And the pictures from that, they were in some public park, right, Tom? There's some public park outside the main downtown of Los Angeles, and there's Babe in street clothes, and he's holding a bat, and he's trying to show William Bendix how it's done. And no. No. But it speaks to the bigness and the originality of the man, that you can't really capture him. And maybe there are just some people that can't be rendered in that way. Like you, I agree. Tom. Like you, Tom.
I think that we've talked about the Goodman movie and William Bendix, but and you mentioned Stephen Lang. I think that the Stephen Lang movie, which aired on NBC on October 6, 1991, the day that Memorial Stadium closed to the Orioles, we went home and watched that, and I thought that the Stephen Lang portrayal was the best of the three of
I
Babe
agree.
Ruth. Nothing great, because as you said, Jane, it's hard to kind of portray that guy, Babe Ruth, because he's bigger than life. It's hard to do that. But I, like you, I hope before that we all pass away that they can come up with another effort to try and get it a little
Well,
bit.
I know there's interest in it because they've been talking to me a bit. So, I don't want to put a camera on it.
Let's hope.
Very good. That's
Who would
good.
you have play the Babe, Jane?
You got the right shape of the face. You can do it.
Oh man,
Mike, in that movie, the Stephen Lang movie, do you remember who played Ty Cobb?
no. Tell me.
Some guy named Pete Rose.
Oh, wow.
Right, you're right. Well, we have all of Stephen Lang's memorabilia from the movie at the Babe Ruth Museum. A lot of it on display, including every day he had to put a prosthetic nose on to
Nose?
mimic the Babe, and we have he kept all of his noses, and we have them. So it's pretty terrific. Good
Mike,
guy.
Do you have the original photo that we used on the cover of the book, the one taken at the Polo Grounds by Nicholas Murray?
Right.
I mean, and this is, God strike me down if the publisher hears about this. They messed around with the cover photo because they turned it backwards. They flipped it. It's this beautiful portrait of him sitting in a bentwood chair by himself on the infield dirt at the Polo Grounds. So, before Yankee Stadium was built to accommodate him. And they turned it, and he's facing that way, and they turned it around. And why are you doing that? Well, first of all, the thing I was concerned about was that he had a bat between his legs, and it looked really gross. So they had to airbrush that out. But they flipped it because the booksellers, Walmart and all those places said, if you have his head in the middle of that space on the right side of the top upper right corner, then we can't put our stickers on it. That's the way the world goes. It's not really a different story from the 48 movie.
There you are.
On that note, I must leave you guys. I'm so sorry. I have to go do a gig with my old friend Dave Kindred, who some of you remember from the Post. Just an absolutely great person and great subject. So read his new book. I'll be back with you next time. Thanks so much.
All right. Love you, Jane. Take care of yourself.
Bye. Bye-bye.
All right. Katie, do you have next question?
Sure, we can open up questions. Sean, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, back in January of 2017, on a Friday night, I got a phone call in my office as I was leaving. I'd just been named the new executive director of the Babe Ruth Museum. And I saw on the screen, because it was 5 o'clock, it was a call coming in from Herndon, Nevada. And I thought, Herndon, Nevada, why does that sound familiar? And my heart skipped a little bit when I realized, until I picked up the phone. And it was Julia Ruth Stevens. And she had just heard that I had become the executive director. And she spent 30 seconds congratulating me, and then 45 minutes explaining to me the enormous responsibility that I now had to perpetuate Daddy's legacy. And she told me it was the same talk that she had given Mike Gibbons back in the early 80s. And I first of all want to say I'm honored and humbled that with Jane, Bill, Tom, Joe, and Mike Gibbons, we have the brightest minds around the legacy of Babe Ruth right here in this session. So I'm humbled and I'm grateful that this program is happening tonight. My question is actually directed at you, Bill, because we've had this conversation a couple times, and it's the question that I get the most. And it's, how would Babe fare against today's pitchers? That's not the question. My question is, how would Babe fare today in today's ballparks?
Well, to answer the primary thrust of your question, clearly the ballparks would favor him significantly. Not surprisingly, the pitchers try to work the ball inside and out against the Babe. That's normal. They do the same thing today. And they would try to challenge him with brush him off the plate with high inside fastballs. But mostly, they would work the outside corner against him. As a result, a lot of Ruth's longest shots would go to center field. And today, I believe that one little corner in Fenway Park at 420 feet is the farthest distance in Major League Baseball. That would be the minimal distance today for the center field dimension. So we could start off with center field, including Yankee Stadium at 490, the Polo Grounds for 470, Shy Park at 475, and so it went. I know you're probably inviting me, Sean, to talk about the plotting I did in my 2007 book, the year Babe Ruth hit 104 home runs. And of course, that the year he hit 59. But what I did, using all the available data, was to plot his long flies, his doubles, his triples. And if you plot them against a grid representing modern stadiums and their distances, right field, right center, center, left center, and left, I came up with 104 home runs. So the answer to your question, he would do fabulously well.
Well, one question, how many opposite fields home runs did he hit in his career? You know, approximately?
Yeah, I don't have the exact number, Joe, but it's I do have it. I would say if we're talking about both left field and left center field,
Yeah.
probably about 150.
Well, that's power to all field.
Which is an impressive number. Given the 714, that's a pretty good percentage going opposite field. And I do want to point out that any great player, anybody of a certain echelon and above, and we got Ruth at the top, from a batting standpoint, has to be able to adjust at the plate. They have to learn, and they're going to have to change. And that's true of everyone, and that was also true of Ruth. I think it's not talked about very much that he changed his batting stance fairly often, dealing with the fact that the pitchers are trying to come up with the way to get out this guy, the toughest at bat. And he would go opposite field. And, yet another level of his greatness was that he had the ability to make these changes necessary to continue to dominate. And I think when I didn't know the number, but when Bill says, 150 or so, that's a pretty darn good percentage of home runs opposite field. And take a look at sluggers today, and you're just not seeing those kind of percentages.
That's right. Okay, thank you. Next, Katie, any other questions?
All right, who is up next? Unmute yourself if you have a question, Steve. There we go.
How y'all doing?
Hello, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Could you comment on the difference between night games and day games? And obviously, he played all day games. And how would that have affected? Is there any effect that would have had?
All right, I'll take a shot at that, Steve. It's a fair question. It's a good question. From the standpoint of physical attrition, obviously it's a lot better to play night games than day games. For the you're not in the sun, you're playing under cooler temperatures, that sort of thing. We do have to counterbalance that with questions about sleeping schedules and traveling, and we can answer all of those. But if the basic question is night games versus day games, I think it's a big advantage to the players. Just ask them today if they'd rather play it in day or night. Now, at one time, when we first started lighting the fields back in the late 30s, there was a scientific technical issue. The lighting wasn't very good. But I've talked to a lot of players on this very subject, and many of them, at least 50% of them, have told me they see the ball better at night than during the day, with all the modern lighting advancements that have been made. So all in all, I think it's an advantage for the modern players.
Yeah, an interesting point, Bill, about the lighting, because when you think about it, in a night game, other than like something like fog or something like this happening, you can have a very consistent lighting situation. In a day game, it changes. It can change when a cloud passes by. It can change because the sun is at a different angle. So that's a really cool point about the fact that there's a consistency level in night games, not not just from one night to the next, because the vast majority clearly today are night games, but within a particular game, the lighting is the same the whole way through, and not the case necessarily in a day game.
Yeah, with
Good point.
shadows.
So what do you think, Joey? I mean, you're calling all these games. You have any opinion about that? Night
Yeah.
baseball, day baseball?
I think it's probably easier to see because in day games, you have glare. You also have shadows, which are a big factor, which can really help a pitcher when you're pitching from the sunlight into the shadows till they move past the pitcher's mound. So I think that's a big advantage to have all night games because today predominantly 80% of the games are at night, I would say. And I think it probably does help today's hitter quite a bit more than playing all those day games that the Babe had to do. Of course, he started games. Now, they used to talk, the old saying was a 2 o'clock hitter because batting practice was at 2 o'clock and the game started at 3 or 3:30. So they probably had to deal with shadows quite a bit at 3:30 up until, depending on the time of the year. So it must have been a lot more difficult, especially with those triple deck stadiums and the shadows moving across from the backstop because baseball fields are all designed so the sun's not in the batter's eyes, where they actually moved past the pitcher's mound and both were actually in shadows or both in sunlight. But I think it is a big advantage.
So Bill Jenkinson, it would seem to me then that if Ruth played the majority of his games at night, he'd have probably hit 120 home runs a year, right?
Well, I'm a Ruthophile. When I look at all the data, I don't see too many advantages, if any, that Babe had playing what he did as opposed to if he had played today.
Right.
What the night games have curtailed or added to is off the field exploits.
That's a fair question too.
Joe, there's still a lot of night left after the ball game's over.
Those games were 2 hours, not like the 3.5 to 4 hour games we have today.
But I think Mike, getting to the gist of the question, it was. I think it gets back to actually something I said earlier, which is the guy obviously had, and I read about it dozens of times, the ability to make adjustments. So if you put him in the time machine and you bring him up to the 1990s, you bring him to the 2010s, I think there's no question initially he's going to struggle because of you got to catch up to all these newfangled pitches and there's differences. That's okay. Struggling is not the issue in baseball. It's overcoming the struggle. That's the issue here. And he showed time and time again that he could do that. And I don't see why that wouldn't be any different.
I'm with you. Okay, great. Katie, anything else?
Next question. All right, Wally, go ahead.
Okay. This I don't mean to go off script, but the one panelist who's not here, I wanted to ask him a question. So I'll just make a statement. It's pretty impressive to be a Baltimorean in Babe Ruth's hometown and have Mark Shera here coming from Mount St. Joe, but he also had another teammate, Gavin Floyd, on that same team. And those guys were drafted 4 and 5. And I don't think there are many people who understand how great Baltimore baseball today is. And I thought it was terrific. I wanted to ask him about Gavin, and Gavin ended up with like 70 or 80, winning games. But and Mark's obviously been a hero. But wow, what a cool thing for our town. Not a question, but just sort of a statement. My wife said, "Don't make a statement," so I will shut up.
Thank you. Good point.
I will tell you, Wally, that we are from Baltimore, and I think that the Baltimore baseball story is as unique, if not more so, than many, many, many other towns. I mean, the products that we have produced over the years, starting with Babe Ruth, but the litany is amazing. You mentioned Teixeira, and what a great gentleman he is for this game. But also, you've got Cal Ripken and Al Kaline You've got Judy Johnson and some of the great Negro League players that came along. So our heritage here is remarkable, and we should all be very proud of it. And not to mention our Baltimore Orioles, who for the most part have been one of the premier franchises in Major League Baseball. So it's been a great run, that's for sure.
Indeed.
Yep.
All right, Ed, did you have a question?
You hear me okay?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, we talked about Babe Ruth being this larger than life figure, this cultural icon, and how he impacted baseball and, the trajectory of that as a, fan interest game, and the challenges he put toward all of his opponents in trying to stop him or do better than he did in their careers. I was just curious whether the panel would think that as great or as, New York was at the time, then do they think that what Babe Ruth accomplished as a New York Yankee, elevating baseball and becoming this larger than life figure, helped elevate New York City as the epicenter of all things cultural and with baseball obviously being part of that culture?
Sure. I don't know if New York over the long haul needed any help from any individual person, but certainly when Babe got there in the 1920s, he was the perfect match for the times, the so-called Roaring 20s. And sure he did. Of course, they helped each other. It was a collaborative type thing, a symbiosis, if you will, and they both helped each other.
Maybe it had a more negative effect on him and a positive effect on all the social opportunities he had.
It certainly was the right stage for him. I don't know if it would have been quite as large playing in Boston even, or Cleveland, or even Chicago, but it was the right stage, and he took advantage of it.
That's right.
Now, one other comment, if I can kick back to the point about whether Babe, how he would have done night versus day. I was just got to thinking about a lot of the new ballparks when they kind of engineer the backgrounds where you don't have the baseball coming out of the pitcher's hands being lost in the white shirts of the people who were sitting in the stands out in center field. Nowadays, they have this pretty wide swath of dark that the ball won't get necessarily lost into as the pitcher's pitching. So that I would tend to think might give an advantage to the hitters today, in addition to playing at night, and probably certainly Babe Ruth's ability to pick those moments out, the opportunity to hit the ball would. I think he would have probably done even obviously much better than he actually did.
That's a great point. I think he certainly would have had to adjust though to the hard throwers today, and he could not use that 40-ounce bat or 42-ounce bat.
Yeah.
He would have had to make a big adjustment there, I think, to get quicker bat speed.
Yeah, but of course, the medical treatments today and the training techniques and what he might have been, the Babe Ruth of 2021 might have been even a better specimen than he may have been in.
Imagine if he lifted weights.
And before we get too far away from your point about the batting backgrounds, it was immensely important to Ruth individually. He really believed in that. One of the lesser known facts about his career was the contribution he made to Dolph Camilli when Babe coached the Dodgers in 1938. Especially on Saturdays and Sundays, the center field grandstands at Ebbets Field would sell out. And Babe noticed that Camilli had a really hard time, a particularly hard time, picking the ball out from all those colored shirts out in the center field seats. So he really leaned hard on the Dodger organization at the time. They eventually put up a green screen out there, and Camilli, to his dying day, attributed Babe Ruth, gave Babe Ruth a lot of credit for helping him through those difficult issues with the batting backgrounds. Ruth talked about it a lot. Those weekend games, most of the ballparks in the American League had center field bleachers. And you get those weekend games when they would sell tickets to people sitting out there. It became extremely difficult to pick up the ball.
Great point. Great point. Any other questions, Katie?
Any last minute questions? I think I'm going to throw in a statement along with Wally's. I had several friends who went to St. Joe, and one of them shared with me not too long ago that they still tell a story about Babe coming back to play at St. Joe and apparently lost one of his World Series rings in the woods. And I just think it's great that that story is still around. Just another testament.
Yeah.
You know, you can go into a number of spaces in Baltimore that have a Ruthian reverb to them. You know, he's still alive in this town. Although I have to admit that when you ask most Baltimoreans what they think of Babe Ruth, they say he's a Yankee. You know, just like just like they do in Boston. He's a Yankee. But nevertheless, we know that he is one of ours and probably our most famous native son. And and we're proud of that for sure. I want to thank our panel this evening. All of these people, Tom and Bill and Joe and Jane, are tremendous advocates and friends of the Babe Ruth Museum, have been with us through thick and thin forever. And I expect we'll be there for the long haul. And I also want to thank our wonderful staff led by Executive Director Sean Hearn, Katie, Dick, who has done a great job with production tonight and throughout this whole process, and to our board of directors led by Bob McKinney and Barry Gossett. So thanks to all. And listen, we have one more big night tomorrow night where we're going to be featuring the 1970 Baltimore Orioles. John Miller will be interviewing Brooks Robinson, Jim Palmer, and Boog Powell, talking about their conquest of the Big Red Machine, Lee May, Johnny Bench, etc. In 1970. It'll be a great show, and John Miller will be on for a live Q&A following that. But anyway, thanks to our panel this evening. You've been terrific. And I agree with Sean Hearn, maybe the best panel discussion we've ever had on Babe Ruth. So thanks very much to everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
It was an honor to be part of it.
Thank you all.